But what this discussion that we've just had suggests is that introducing money or cash or market relations can change the character, the meaning of the goods being exchanged, especially for non-material goods. If you sell me a flat-screen television or give me one as a gift, the flat-screen television will work just the same either way. It won't be changed. The good will be the same. But the same may not be true with other goods, non-material goods, such as teaching and learning, expressing gratitude, learning to care for my health and fitness. In these cases, the worry that underlies some of the objections, I think, is the sense that in some of these domains, at least, money and market values can actually change the character of goods. And if that's true, then economics and economic analysis need to be more complicated and more morally nuanced and attentive than economists often assume. In Switzerland, a few years ago, they were trying to decide where to locate a nuclear waste site. No community wants one in its backyard. But a small town in the mountains of Switzerland had been identified as geologically most likely the safest place for the nuclear waste. But the local community, under the law, had to approve. So before the parliament decided, some economists did a survey. They asked residents of this small town in the mountains of Switzerland whether, if the parliament chose their town as the safest place, they would vote to approve. Despite the risks, 51% said yes, they would accept it. Then the economists asked a follow-up question. They sweetened the deal. They said, now suppose the parliament chooses your town and offers to compensate each individual in the town up to $8,000 cash every year for undertaking the risk. Then how many do you think were willing to accept it? 73? 90? 90? Lower? 25? You've taken this class before. Or maybe you've read the book. The number dropped in half from 51 to 25% when they were offered money. Now, from the standpoint of standard economic analysis, this is paradoxical. Normally, when you offer to pay people to do something, their willingness to do that thing increases. It doesn't decrease. So what happened? How do we explain? How can this be explained? Well, you might say when the money was offered, they thought to themselves, this must really be riskier than we thought. But they tested for that and found that the estimate of the risk was the same before and after that offer was made. So something else was going on. Something, I think, connected to this idea about instrumental values crowding out intrinsic ones. When the majority, 51%, said they were willing to accept the nuclear waste dump, they did so out of a sense of civic responsibility, a sense of civic virtue. This is needed for the community as a whole. The waste has to go somewhere. We're willing to bear the burden. But then, they asked the people who changed their minds, why did you change your mind? Their answer? They said, we didn't want to be bribed. We didn't want to be bribed. What did they mean? Well, once the money was offered, it became a financial transaction. They were willing to expose their families and themselves to the risk for the sake of civic duty, but they weren't willing to be bribed to face this risk and impose it on their families. So here, as many feared might be the case with the health bribes or paying the children to read, here, on a collective level, is a case where a monetary offer changes the character of the question, of the relationship, and seems to crowd out civic virtue or civic responsibility, the higher motivation. Now, This observation that money, cash incentives can crowd out non-market values, can be corrosive of non-market relationships, be they civic or personal or educational or familial, does not give us the answer to any given question, should we or should we not use markets and cash incentives. That's true. We need to know more. But what it does suggest is that we can't decide where markets belong, where they serve the public good, and where they don't belong, purely on efficiency grounds, the economists' grounds alone. Because we have to ask what attitudes, what values, what norms may be crowded out or diminished or corrupted or eroded if we marketize this good. We have to ask that question. And then we have to ask, and how important to us, morally, civically, are those attitudes, values, and norms? Which is to suggest that it's a mistake to think that we can decide on grounds of economic efficiency where markets belong and where they don't. One area during the past 3 decades, as Ruth said, I call it the period of market triumphalism. One area where an important set of values and attitudes has been corroded by the marketization of everything has to do with commonality, the glue that holds societies together. Because the more things money can buy, not only does money matter more in the society, which explains why those of modest means have a tougher and tougher time of it. There's another challenge. The more things money can buy, the fewer the occasions when people from different walks of life, different social backgrounds, encounter one another. At a time of rising inequality, the marketization of everything means that people of affluence and people of modest means lead increasingly separate lives. We look up after this roughly 3-decade period and we find that we live and work and shop and play in different places. Our children go to different schools. This is not so good for democracy, nor is it a satisfying way to live. Democracy does not require perfect equality, but it does require that citizens share in a common life. What matters is that people from different backgrounds and social positions encounter one another, bump up against one another in the ordinary course of everyday life. Because this is how we come to negotiate and abide our differences. And this is how we come to care for the common good. And so in the end, the question of markets is not mainly an economic question. It's really a question about how we want to live together. Do we want a society where everything is up for sale? Or are there certain moral and civic goods that markets do not honor and money cannot buy? Thank you very much.
I think I've got one very important first question. Is it too late to become a mature student at Harvard Justice Course? It's also really, really impressive to find an author who manages to get the audience to do half his work for him. Can I ask you, Michael, because don't want to disenfranchise the audience, but I'm curious as to how we get these assorted genies back in the bottles.
Right.
I mean, there's some truly horrendous examples in your book, not least the selling of a poor man's kidney for a rich man's kidney failure. How, so long as these conditions both obtain huge wealth and aspiration and huge poverty, how do we put that genie back in the bottle?
Right. Well, it's a matter of deciding together through democratic argument, and we will argue, what values should limit and constrain the reach of markets. That's up to us. The reason I say we will argue, and the reason we have hesitated to engage in these arguments in our politics, is we often say, even where it's not a philosopher, who am I, or who are you, to pass judgment on the value of this or that good? Why, if two people agree on the price of a kidney, even if one is a peasant in India, it's worth it to him or her to sell that kidney to a person in the West, because with that money, he or she can maybe send a child to get an education. Who are we to decide that this is a wrong way or an inappropriate way or an undignified way of valuing these goods? And yet what I'm suggesting is we can't avoid these questions in public. And if we shrink from engaging in a morally robust kind of public discourse, it's not as if we are being neutral on these questions. We are letting markets give the answers to those questions, decide these questions for us. So the first thing we need to do is, I think, to reinvigorate our public debate to address directly the big ethical questions that are at stake in all of these decisions, including questions about the meaning of justice and rights and civic virtue and the common good, but also including questions about the right way of valuing the human person, body, procreation, reproductive capacity, military service, criminal justice, to go back to some of those early examples, health, education, teaching and learning. These are contentious, value-laden questions, but I'm suggesting we need a politics that takes them on directly.